Welcome to our video on the top 10 most hated countries in the world in 2025. Around the globe, some nations have earned strong disapproval due to political conflicts, human rights violations, aggressive foreign policies, or economic dominance. From superpowers involved in wars to countries facing internal strife and controversial leadership, these nations have sparked global outrage. In this video, we'll explore why these countries are disliked, how their actions impact international relations, and what makes them controversial. Stay tuned as we break down the reasons behind their global reputation. Let's dive in. 10. United Kingdom. The United Kingdom's reputation has suffered in recent years, particularly due to Brexit. The decision to leave the European Union has created significant economic instability, and the divisive debate surrounding it has polarized the population. The UK's handling of immigration, particularly in the aftermath of Brexit, has also led to criticism, with many accusing the country of adopting exclusionary and xenophobic policies. Issues like Scotland's push for independence and political corruption scandals, such as Partygate, further add to the UK's negative image. While the country remains a major global player, these internal conflicts and external issues have led to growing dissatisfaction with the UK's role on the world stage. 9. France. France's reputation has been clouded by its controversial policies on immigration and secularism. The country's treatment of its Muslim population, including the banning of religious symbols like the hijab in public schools and its strict secular policies, has sparked protests and unrest. France's colonial past, particularly in Africa, still affects its relationships with former colonies, with many accusing the country of neocolonialism. Protests and strikes over labor laws, police brutality, and racial inequality have further fueled discontent. While France remains a global leader in culture and politics, its internal divisions and handling of its minority populations have caused it to be viewed negatively by many. 8. India. India's reputation has been increasingly marred by rising religious tensions, particularly between the Hindu majority and Muslim minority. The government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, particularly through the controversial Citizenship Amendment Act, CAA, has been accused of discriminating against Muslims and other minorities, leading to protests and violence. India's handling of religious and caste-based discrimination has led to increased criticism from international human rights organizations. While India is one of the world's fastest-growing economies, the country's internal divisions and increasing nationalism have raised concerns about its democratic backsliding. These issues, coupled with growing fears about the treatment of its Muslim population, have contributed to India's negative global perception. 7. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is criticized for its authoritarian rule, its role in the Yemen conflict, and its human rights violations. The 2018 assassination of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, allegedly ordered by the Saudi government, caused international outrage and further damaged the kingdom's reputation. Saudi Arabia's involvement in the Yemen war has caused immense human suffering, with tens of thousands of civilians killed and millions displaced. Domestically, the country's strict interpretation of Islamic law and restrictions on women's rights are widely criticized. While Saudi Arabia has made some progress, such as allowing women to drive and participating in international business ventures, its overall human rights record remains poor. Additionally, its close ties to the United States and its role in regional conflicts make it an unpopular ally for many around the world. 6. Iran. Iran is one of the most politically isolated nations in the world, primarily due to its nuclear ambitions and support for militant groups across the Middle East. The government of Iran has long been accused of sponsoring terrorism, with its backing of Hezbollah, Hamas, and other groups contributing to regional instability. Iran's involvement in proxy conflicts in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen has made it a central player in many of the Middle East's most violent and complex struggles. The country's repressive political environment, which includes the imprisonment of journalists, political opponents, and activists, adds to its negative image. Additionally, the government's human rights abuses, particularly against women and religious minorities, have drawn widespread international condemnation. Despite attempts at diplomacy, including the 2015 nuclear deal, Iran's policies and actions continue to fuel global resentment, particularly from the West and its Middle Eastern neighbors. 5. United States. The United States, while a global superpower, has long faced criticism for its military interventions, economic policies, and social issues. Its involvement in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which resulted in hundreds of thousands of civilian casualties, sparked anger worldwide. The U.S. has also been blamed for creating instability in the Middle East and North Africa, particularly through its support of authoritarian regimes and proxy wars. Domestically, issues such as systemic racism, gun violence, and a lack of healthcare coverage for millions of citizens add to the country's controversial standing. Furthermore, the U.S. is often seen as hypocritical for promoting democracy abroad while struggling with its internal political polarization and corruption. The country's frequent use of economic sanctions against countries like Venezuela and Cuba is viewed by many as a form of economic imperialism. With its leadership in global power struggles and repeated interference in the domestic affairs of other nations, the United States continues to spark both admiration and resentment. 4. Israel. Israel's reputation has been marked by its prolonged and controversial conflict with the Palestinians. The Israeli government's policies towards Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Gaza, including the expansion of settlements and military operations, have drawn widespread condemnation from international bodies, including the United Nations. These actions have been seen as violations of international law, and the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza continues to draw outrage from human rights organizations. Pro-Palestinian movements, along with various Arab nations, vehemently criticize Israel's treatment of Palestinians, calling it apartheid-like. While Israel is often defended by its allies, especially the United States, for its right to self-defense, the harsh realities on the ground, including civilian casualties and the blockade on Gaza, perpetuate its status as one of the most divisive and disliked countries globally. Israel's policies continue to fuel tensions in the Middle East, making it a lightning rod for criticism. 3. North Korea. North Korea is infamous for its totalitarian regime under the Kim dynasty, which has perpetuated extreme isolationism and oppression. The country's nuclear weapons program, which defies international agreements, has led to constant tensions with the United States and neighboring countries. North Korea's frequent missile tests and threats of nuclear war have made it a constant source of global anxiety. The regime's treatment of its own citizens is equally appalling, with reports of forced labor camps, public executions, and widespread poverty. Human rights groups frequently report on the brutal repression of dissent, with any form of opposition to the regime being punishable by death or imprisonment. Additionally, the cult of personality surrounding Kim Jong-un and his family's rule perpetuates the regime's oppressive control over its people. North Korea's failure to engage in meaningful diplomacy and its aggressive stance toward the world ensure its place as one of the most hated countries in the world. 2. China. China has become one of the most controversial countries on the world stage, primarily due to its human rights violations and increasingly assertive foreign policy. The most pressing issue is its treatment of the Uyghur Muslim population in Xinjiang, where millions are allegedly detained in forced labor camps and subjected to indoctrination efforts. The Chinese government has faced intense criticism for its handling of pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, where it imposed a sweeping security law that stifled freedoms and arrested dissenters. On the international front, China's territorial claims over the South China Sea and its heavy-handed approach to Taiwan, including threats of military action, have put it at odds with many countries in the region and beyond. Furthermore, China's expansive Belt and Road Initiative, which it uses to assert influence over developing countries, has raised concerns about neocolonialism. The country's vast surveillance infrastructure, censorship, and control over the internet have also earned it a reputation as an authoritarian state. These combined factors make China one of the most disliked nations globally. 1. Russia. Russia's negative global perception has significantly worsened since the start of the war in Ukraine. President Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine in 2022 resulted in millions of refugees and widespread destruction, drawing severe international condemnation. In addition to the humanitarian crisis, Russia's aggressive foreign policy, including interference in Western elections, cyber attacks, and a consistent pattern of denying freedom of speech and suppressing opposition movements at home, has alienated much of the global community. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its support for separatist movements in other countries have made it a pariah state. Despite its vast natural resources and military might, Russia is seen as a destabilizing force in global politics, particularly in Europe and NATO-affiliated countries. Sanctions imposed by the West have severely impacted its economy, but its ongoing defiance and refusal to change have fueled international resentment, ensuring Russia remains one of the most hated nations in 2025.